It might seem that white or at least very light flowers are very boring to paint because the palette is quite limited. Even though these magnolia flowers have some pink on the outside of the flower at the bottom, inside they're actually pretty white. But if we look closer inside, even within the shadows, for example, there will be lighter and darker areas, and the colors are going to be slightly different as well. Watch my magnolia tutorial and see how many colors I end up using. The whole variety of colors. Some of them are warmer, like this color that I'm using, kind of very light pink, to establish the sunlit areas. And before that, I already indicated the areas of the shadow, pretty much those darker, cooler colors within the flowers. But of course, those darker colors within the flowers are still going to be lighter than what's around them. For example, if we squint our eyes and look at that, we'll see that the flowers, no matter in the shadow or in the sunlit area, they're still lighter. So that's the relationship I'm going for. And right now I'm working on non-sanded paper again. It's been a few tutorials that I'm showing on non-sanded paper, but you can see you can definitely plan out your colors. You can do quick sketches on non-sanded paper and it works fine. And some artists do just absolutely unbelievable work on non-sanded paper. So it's not the paper, it's us artists, I mean. Now I'm very lightly using hard pastels. If I am going to press too hard with this, then this non-sanded paper is not going to take much pigment. So I have to work very lightly, so there's still some tooth left on that paper so that I can layer softer pastels on top of it. But right now you can see I kinda blend basically with a pink, warmer pink, that darker, somewhat darker purplish color underneath. And now basically switching to softer pastels. This darker purple is for the area that is going to show me where the petals separate, where maybe there's a little bit more shadow. So this actually right now sets up the darker values, the mid-tones. That's what I had for overall shadows within the petals. And I have my highlights. But the highlights, for the highlights, I was using the color that's not yet the lightest highlight because I want to reserve that for later. In the beginning, I just want to indicate that it's lighter than all the other colors so far, but actually it's still kind of like a lighter mid-tone for that light area, because otherwise if I go really light, then that petal is going to be looking flat and I won't be able to add some variations within that light area or to indicate some highlights. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a like under the video and please consider subscribing if you like watching the video tutorials like this. And now you can see how this green around it makes the flowers pop against that, and part of it is that darker value, darker green, but not everywhere. Somewhere it's going to be closer to the color within the flowers, and somewhere where the flowers are more sunlit, they are going to stand out more. And usually that is a harder edge as well. So within some areas there are darker greens and darker browns maybe. So the key is not to end up with a flower that looks kind of cut out from the background with very hard edges all around. I actually want to create a little bit softer edges in some areas, and somewhere it definitely will stand out more against that dark. Now I can start modeling the petals within the flowers a little bit more, and it's just a range of different colors. For example, I had this cooler overall colors, and I had a little bit of pink blended into it, but now I can start adding very subtle highlights within those petals, like I was using very light lilac color. Now I actually use somewhat warm light turquoise to indicate maybe some of the reflected color within the petals. So all of that is going to help me to create that three-dimensional look of the petals. And there's a center, but the center in that bigger flower is in the shadow, so it's not going to be very light. But on the ground we do see some of that kind of orange color, and I like to create that kind of background that's a little bit more abstract, so that it doesn't compete with the flowers, it doesn't have too many sharp edges. And here you see this very light color. Again, we can call it white, but it's actually very light pink, and it's important to specify kind of that it's a warmer color, because the warmer color is going to stand out more. And you can see how the overall petal might be pretty light already, because I used that lighter color, but once I actually create also the value contrast within it, even though it's going to be rather subtle, but still it's going to create a brilliant point there, the highlight, and it just creates a nice sparkle on the petal. A little bit of the light blue, maybe I'll add some of that within the petals and soften those purples a little bit, particularly in the areas that are more exposed to the light, and also at the top of the petals they are not as purple. It's closer to the center of the flower on the outside where we see more purple, and some of it is kind of cooler purple, but some of it is going to be warmer, particularly if there's light passing through that area of the flower. And just adding a little bit of that darker color, it just creates more contrast, and it makes more interesting painting, more interesting composition, because when we have just kind of one flat value dominate the painting, the drawing, it's becoming a little boring. So that's why the value contrast is really something that helps a lot to make more interesting painting. And it's also about creating volume. We cannot really create volume with very close values. We need contrast. Sometimes I would use harder pastels to kind of to soften some of it, some of this layering a little bit. And otherwise, mostly it's softer pastels. I'm not staying with hard pastels for long when it's on non-sanded paper. And right now, kind of the highlights in the highlights, I'm calling them highlights in the shadow areas, but they are darker, they are more subtle than the highlights in the sunlit areas. So we definitely need to see that difference, to show that difference, that there are lighter areas within the shadow and they are going to be lighter colors, but the highlights in the sunlit part, they're just going to be so much more lighter. They're going to stand out so much more. And you can see how bringing a little bit of this turquoise, it just adds another color to this whole kind of pink purple palette, and it just brings more life to it. I like mixing up colors if they do serve the purpose, if they create the effect that I need. And now a little bit of the green, bright green for the leaves. Maybe not quite exactly in the pattern that we see in the reference photo, but it feels like it needs some of this warmer, brighter green. And in the background is quite sunlit there, but of course it's in the distance. So I'm going to maybe cool a little bit some of that greenery and just to create some depth there as well. And just refining a little bit more the petals and adding some of this warmer color. And if the petal is picking up reflected light, so it's another highlight even in the shadow area sometime. There are quite a bit of layers right now here, and some people actually would be asking at this point, you put so much pigment but it's still not caking up. Well, it's light touch. It's really, that's what it is. It's the light touch, and you can get away with adding more pastel even on non-sanded paper. But if you are too heavy, if you're just pressing into the paper too much, you will be very limited. So I would definitely suggest, if you're just learning or working with pastels, I would suggest that you try to work lighter, and that would help you quite a bit. And not just on non-sanded paper. On sanded paper, we also don't want to just keep piling up that pigment. It's really coming down to adding the colors that are just needed when we have enough experience to make that judgment, to get away with as few layers as possible and still maybe have some underpainting showing, or the color of the paper contributing to that final layer of color. That is something that we learn over the years of working, and don't feel like you absolutely need to know it right from the start. It comes from the experience. If you're interested in learning more in depth about painting flowers, about color, I have some self-study courses that you might want to check out. The link will be in the description below. By the way, that little card that I was using here and there to kind of to scrape the areas a little bit, it's just a piece of those fake credit cards that come in the mail. The piece of it serves really good to pick up some of the extra pigment to make some edges maybe a little bit softer. And plastic one usually is the better. Not the paper ones, because the edge will wear off too fast. It just wouldn't be sharp enough. So a little bit of warmer pink here and there. And it's actually almost done, almost finished here. I want it to be nice and loose, free. And in the background, there are some trees, some magnolia trees or other flowering, blossoming trees. So I'm adding a little bit of pink. And what I like about that is that I echo that pink color in another area of the painting. Because before it was just magnolia flowers kind of floating in the sea of green. But now that top left corner has some of that pink color, some of the reddish color, it's connecting better with the foreground with these colors. So that's usually something that I would love to have in the painting, otherwise it just doesn't have enough continuity. And it also helps to move the eye around, because the eye travels from one area where this color is to the other, just like the same with the geometric shapes, so things like that. And just a little bit here, and that's pretty much it. And that's the time when I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and click the like button under this movie if you liked it, if you enjoyed it. And also let me know, how do you like painting on non-sanded paper, or if you prefer using sanded paper with the underpainting all the time. I also have another video here on YouTube with a spring subject. It's how to make color studies of cherry blossom trees, so you can check that out next.